Hey everybody, my name's Derek. I'm the CEO and founder of Wenwyn, Wenwyn.com. When you need a win at the intersection of leadership and culture. Speaking of culture, what does it mean to actually engage culture? What do we mean by culture? Well, that's what this episode is all about. But before we get into it, let me encourage you to hit that like button or subscribe so that we can get that giant YouTube algorithm going so that we can continue to create content for you in the future. And as always, check out our website for online courses and for options as you find yourself needing some coaching at the intersection of leadership and culture. All right, let's talk about culture, because defining culture isn't as easy as most people say it is. In fact, it's pretty notoriously difficult. What do we mean by saying culture? For instance, we say, he's so cultured or she's so cultured. What in the world does that mean? Well, typically it means sophisticated. It's a synonym for something else. And that's not a real good definition of culture, because culture is everywhere. It permeates everything. It's not someone who's more or less sophisticated. So what in the world do we mean? Well, scholars and academics have been struggling with definitions for decades. And let me just give a working definition for the purpose of this episode. Tharp came out with this definition in 2009. Here's what he wrote. Most simply, culture involves three basic human activities: what people think, what people do, and what people make. So what people think, what people do, and what people make. He goes on. Further, several common properties arise. Culture is shared, learned, transmitted cross-generationally, symbolic, adaptive, and integrated. To speak of culture as being shared narrows the field of relevant activity to that which is common and social. Now, this is really key here. Culture isn't just what someone does. Culture is not that a company brought in a cool pool table or offers a game time. That's not culture. It can contribute to culture, but it's certainly not culture. Culture is fluid. It's constantly changing. It's not truly static. And so often we want to capture culture and say, this is what it means to be fill in the blank, whatever tribe, whatever peoples, whatever country. But time marches on. And therefore, culture marches on. One final aspect of this quote from Tharp here. He says, culture is integrated in the sense that it permeates society and becomes part of the social machinery. Culture is the ever-present ethereal medium in which members live and through which they act. To get a broader sense of this as it applies to globalization, Lechner and Boley in 2004 said this world society has a culture. It instills in many people a budding consciousness of living in a world society. And of course, they're referring to something called cosmopolitanism. But Ott says this. He says, depending on where they are, with whom they're speaking, and what the issue at hand is, they may reflect various cultures. So someone isn't simply trapped by their own culture. You can actually reflect many cultures. You can have a hybridization of cultures, or you could become what's called transnational. In the 2022 Winter Olympics, Eileen Gu is a famous American who is also Chinese, who decided to represent China in the Olympics because she wanted to further the sport that she was in that country. She viewed herself transnationally, not just tethered to the US, but that she was part of a couple of countries that she felt that she could represent best. So culture is social. Culture is something that is built, that is reflected in our attitudes, in our actions, and what we think and what we make. Now, here's the question. How do we decide what decisions to make? As an individual, that's one question, but how do we do so in society? How do groups work? And the answer is, whether invisibly or visibly, they default to certain values that inform decision making. Now, Peterson and others write quite a bit about the idea of hierarchy of values. But to kind of baseline it, all it's really saying is that you got to choose. At some point, you're making decisions based on what is important to you. So if you think about this, then we have values that inform behaviors and behaviors that then shape cultures. If we can address the values, we can address the cultures. If we can celebrate the values, we can celebrate individuality. So when we talk about navigating at the intersection of leadership and culture, what we're talking about is how do we recognize the behaviors, the decisions, the thinking patterns that are specific to certain groups around the world, and how those are shared internationally and globally, but also how does a leader then begin to affect change in those cultures? And so often the answer to that is a values shift. Now, we see this all the time in families, where families run into different values. If you think of families as a kind of a base level social group, which makes sense, there's more than one, and there are predominant family behaviors or patterns that either are or aren't recognized, but are still very real. So let me just give you an example. When I was growing up, the family kitchen table at dinner time was party on. It was the place you gathered. Everybody came to the table. There were no devices. There were no, of course, we didn't have devices when I was growing up, but the TV was turned off. Nobody ate in front of the TV. It was very deliberate. My parents wanted us all to gather at the table. But it wasn't just to gather and eat and say, so how was your day? The table became the place where everything could be talked about. And believe me, we talked about everything. We sang songs at the table. We told fart jokes at the table. There was all kinds of talk that happened at the table. Whether your mouth was open or not, it was game on. And some of my favorite moments in life were gathered around that kitchen table. Now, when I was a boy, I would travel to Europe pretty regularly because my mom was German. And so I would go visit my grandparents. And if you were to ask my grandparents, they would say, oh, it's the same thing here. Why? Because people tend to have great conversation at tables, and that was certainly true at their house as well. But I remember once thinking, oh, it's the same thing. And so someone said something that sparked a song, and I started to sing the song, and my grandparents, without saying a word, let me know that's not what we do around this table. And I immediately, I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you just went, da-da-da-da-da, and you guys kind of shut it down, because I knew it wasn't acceptable behavior for them around the kitchen table. Values. They didn't value that around the kitchen table. Maybe you've visited someone and they told you, oh, we're super relaxed, we come, we joke around, we love humor, and you get around that table and you say something that you think is humorous, and boy, do you immediately know whether it's going to fly or not. That's just one small glimpse into how values can rub into each other and create friction. And we all invisibly adapt to values. Why? Well, because we're social creatures. We want to belong. Now, at Wenwyn, we happen to believe that every city on the planet is unique. And we think it's a good thing that it's unique. The future shouldn't be reductionistic. It shouldn't be this place where everything everywhere is essentially the same, that you're just trying to pick which spot on the planet with which climate you want to live in. Instead, we think that there are some fundamental differences. But how do you navigate those differences in a world full of cities, where city structures can often feel the same, right? There's hospitals there, there's restaurants there, everyone's touting the same thing. We have sidewalks, we have parks, we have zoos, we have museums. So where's the difference? And the answer is right where it's always been. The difference is in the values. The difference is in the values. So if you can know the difference in the values, as a leader, you now have insight. And when you have insight, as I talked about in the last episode, you can really instigate change. And insight is really based on reality, the present reality, the things that you see. But you can begin then to know what should be celebrated or what should be instigated so that real change can happen in your area. I want you to be aware that we have a course coming out on social responsibility, kind of justice perspectives. We've got a great vision and strategy course that you can take, Wenwyn.com for more information. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button or hit the like button. That allows us to continue producing content. All right, take care, and until the next episode.